There's those that are the trailblazers, and those are the laggers. Until we knew the earth was round, the earth was flat. The majority of people are sitting in the same bliss world that I sat in. It's going to stock up on those dividends, and maybe I'll get enough income from those dividends. It was a hit and miss. Yeah, I got the dividends, but then I'd see Suncor drop about $15 in about a month because of the oil cycles and stuff like that. The word that I always hated, but I didn't know any other option, was it's meltdown. Talk to any financial planners, they'll say, how are we going to melt down your R's, P's, and RIFs and your TFSAs and stuff, and what strategy, and combine it with your CPP. And if we could do the puzzle pieces just right, you should be okay. You should be okay. And it's like, why should I just be okay? I'm the kind of person who's like, why can't I do 20% yields? Why can't I do 30% yields? And until somebody shows me the risks on it that I can't mitigate, I'm going to keep trying to see if it works.
Welcome back to another go-round with the Masters of the Market. This week, I could not be more excited to have Perry on with me. Now, Perry and I connected on Blossom. As everybody out there knows, Blossom is the go-to community for investors. So, Perry, welcome to Masters of the Market. I'm excited to get to your story. And I guess with that being said, I'll just throw the first question over to you, which is, what exactly is your story and how'd you get to where you are today?
First of all, thanks for the invite. I'm sort of caught off guard because being on Blossom, I was just basically the average retail investor. I came on just to look at things and get somebody to talk to, as we were talking about earlier. Just a community that of like-minded individuals were talking. And the fact that people actually want to hear my story is a little bit humbling, because I just think of myself like everybody else. So my story is basically, I go back. I've always been interested in finance and investing. Even as a teenager, I think I've told this story a few times. I borrowed the little money I had, or had the little money that I had back as a teenager to do penny stocks and stuff. So I was even interested in it then. Didn't go well back then, of course, because every mistake you could think of making, I was making then. So yeah, that was a nice experiment. But the desire to be investing and stuff was something I've sort of had all along. As I moved into being an adult and my career started, I've definitely a long career that I just retired a year and a half ago in the IT industry, doing basically systems design and analysis. So my love of doing deep dive analysis on business problems and coming up with solutions that meet all the business's needs, it's just sort of ingrained in me. It's something I actually love doing. So everything, when people say, well, geez, Perry, do you have a finance background? You created this spreadsheet and stuff? Not really. No, I don't have any finance background. So I'm going to warn everybody here, if I'm giving you advice, I'm not. I'm telling you what I'm doing. And if you guys want to follow me, that's great. If you don't want to believe me, that's fine. This is my story and I just follow it. And if people are interested in what I'm doing, it's an honor that people are actually interested. But again, my background is IT. I also, on the side, have always been entrepreneurial. I have a side business. I've done independent consulting. I've actually joined and was actually a mentor for young business startups, like 19 to 25 to 30-year-olds, where I had helped them mentor their startup businesses. So I've always liked out-of-the-box thinking, coming up with an idea. I don't like being told this is the way things have to do. I'm always looking at, why can't we do something? When somebody says you don't do it this way, I'm always looking at, okay, well, until you can prove me otherwise, why can't I do this? So, and the reason I bring that up, Ari, is because this whole my name for it is not passive investing. It's actually derivatives-based passive investing, because you really got to throw the derivatives part of it in there, because there's different kinds of passive investing, like dividend passive investing. So yeah, it's relatively new in the community, when it comes to investing strategies using derivative-based passive investing. For me, it fit who I am. Like, I'm the kind of person who's like, why can't I do 20% yields? Why can't I do 30% yields? And until somebody shows me the risks on it that I can't mitigate, I'm going to keep trying to see if it works. But going back from teenage in, I was like everybody else. I'm just an average story. I worked 9 to 5, basically. Every time you got enough free money in your paycheck, you put it into I was on a large bank, typical managed portfolio where everyone did the balanced portfolio, and you just put in your 100 or whatever money you had every month into the into your balanced portfolio, and it just went there. And then you almost didn't even look at it at a time, but you just hope that by the time you retire, you had enough that you can actually retire on. But I was already starting to get worried back when I was in my 40s. I'm currently 61, again, retired for a year and a half. But even when I was in my 40s, I was looking at my managed balanced portfolio. And I was like, you think you're going somewhere, and then all of a sudden you're up, but you're actually going up, and then the 2008 markets crash happens, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh great, there goes 5 years of growth. I'm now back down to where I was, and it's like, am I actually going to have enough money when I retire? So it's always bothered me. I do remember even reaching out to some of the. It was Altamira way back when I was using him in the early days. And I asked Altamira, why can't you guys do short positions? Why do you have to do everything in long positions? If you know that the markets are going to likely have a bad, bear run, why can't you? And again, honestly, they can't, right? Because they can only play in long positions. But for me, it bothered me that they knew the train was coming at them, but they had no opportunity to veer away from it or actually jump on the train coming on them. So I knew all along that there was something that I didn't like about balanced portfolios, but I just kept on going until my, about 4 or 5 years before I retired. So about 6 years ago, my bank basically, what they did for me and my wife is they did a very deep dive analysis of my retirement analysis. Like, what does it take to retire? How much money do you need? What are your investments? How close are you to retiring? So we went through that process about 7 years ago, which I'll say is about 5 or 6 years before I retired. Our needs were modest. Like, I'm not like anybody, like I don't live in $1 million home and stuff like that. Our needs are modest. We basically had said you needed between $4,000 and $5,000. And then when you looked at the investments I built up, after 30 something years, I built up about 800,000, 700,000, which again, not an amazing number. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people in their 50s and 60s that have been contributing that actually have even more than we had. But when you plugged in the numbers, it's like, okay, Perry, you and your wife, you should be able to make it. Like, by the time, as long as you die by 90, you'll be okay, right? It's like, and this is that retirement meltdown, because of course you spend your entire career collecting money and saving money till you're going to retire. And then it's a jump to switch over to say, well, you're no more collecting. You're now having to actually consume your retirement investment. And the word that I always hated, but I didn't know any other option, was it's meltdown. And again, you talk to any financial planners, they'll say, how are we going to melt down your R's, P's, and RIFs and your TFSAs and stuff, and what strategy, and combine it with your CPP. And if we could do the puzzle pieces just right, you should be okay. You should be okay. And it's like, why should I just be okay? And then so I thought I got to a point in 2022, which is about a year before I retired, where I was at a point where I said, you know what, I want to try something on my own. So I took one of my several accounts, which was my non-registered account. It just had a little bit of play money in it. And I said, I'm going to start going back into the business of trying to invest myself. I didn't have a strategy at all. Like, I knew I wanted income, but I didn't know how I was going to get income. And I know there was an interview by somebody interviewed Adriano, and the funny part is when he was saying it, I was thinking to myself, man, yeah, he did it a lot earlier, which God bless him that he could retire at 35, 40. That's great. But he was saying the sort of the same things. I knew I wanted income. I knew I wanted something that would pay my bills every month, but I didn't know what I wanted. Like, I thought, okay, I'm going to use energy stocks like Suncor, and I'm going to hunt for the biggest dividends I could find and just going to stock up on those dividends, and maybe I'll get enough, income from those dividends. It was a hit and miss. Yeah, I got the dividends, but then I'd see Suncor drop about $15 in about a month because of the oil cycles and stuff like that. And I just wasn't, I didn't really come up with a strategy. I was just like trying this, trying that. I found Athabasca oil, which is one of my gems. And that was only because of my experiments with the Canadian oil industry. It's still my number one gem holding to this day. But then in February of 2023, that was like, I'm now only like about 11 or about 10 months away from me retiring. I was sitting here working in the desk that I'm working right here, because I work from home. So I'm sitting here. And over here, right there is another TV that I always on the side had BNN, Canadian Business News Network, on. And I started seeing these advertisements for Hamilton's HMAX, which is like, okay, what is this HMAX? It's like, and it says promising 13% yields. I'm going, 13% yields? I was happy I was getting 6 or 7. It's like, what is this? Like, first of all, as everyone else would have think, is skeptical. It's like, okay, how can you make 13% yields when dividends can't make even 6 or 7%, right? So, but of course, the curiosity side is like, hey, this could be the magic bullet. I started researching about HMAX and actually Hamilton's other ETFs, and that introduced me into the entire new world of derivatives-based covered call passive investing. Of course, when you do that and you start researching Hamilton's HMAX and stuff like that, Google's beautiful algorithm starts showing you up the related YouTube influencers that were talking about it. And Adriano was actually one of the first ones that actually started watching. He's like, okay. So he's giving me more keywords that I can use. So I started using that. I started searching about, okay, what is this covered call ETFs? And again, the analyst architect in me sort of said, no, until I understand everything inside out, I'm going to always be skeptical. People were warning, and they still to this day on the Blossom in the Blossom community keep talking about, erosion and return on capital and it's evil and stuff like that. I'm like, no, it's not evil until I understand it's evil. So I actually interviewed some of the fund managers at Hamilton saying, okay, how are you doing this? Well, people are saying this is erosion, and people are saying you're announcing rock and stuff like that. And it was really good hearing it from the horse's mouth where they're saying, no, Perry, let me explain what rock is. There's good rock and there's bad rock. Good rock is basically a tax classification that basically the IRS and the CRA say for premiums coming from options. That's what they call it. It is called rock. Bad rock is when they're paying out too much of it beyond what they earn, and it's going to erode the value of the ETF. So big win for me to understand the difference between that there is good rock and bad rock. And they also explained how they keep it stable and stuff like that. So those were really good early stages of learning passive and derivative-based covered call ETFs. HMAX was my first ETF, along with a couple others from Hamilton, because I didn't know yet about Evolve or Harvest, or forget about the US ones. I didn't know about even the other Canadian ones. But it moved really fast, Ari, after that. Like when I bought my first ETF in March of 2023, by I'd say about July or August, I was already almost all my RRSPs and my TFSAs had been migrated already. I basically, once I believed it worked, I said, okay, if this works, I'm going to move my first RRSP in. I'm going to move my wife's RRSP in. I'm going to move my TFSAs in. So and then the other one was my Lira was going to move in. So I'd say I retired October 1 of 2023. By September, I had everything done except the main thing where I actually had to retire and start converting things over. So I would, and it's funny when I listen to some of the other interviews where they say, I knew I was committed and I believed in this strategy when you make a big move. I think it was Adriano that said that they sold their apartment. They were so convinced they were going to sell their apartment and put the money towards the strategy. And I know of some local friends and they, that did this kind of same thing. They knew they were believing in it when they sold their income property. For me, I knew I was convinced when I had to make a decision. I was retiring. I had a company pension. I looked at the pension and it was scary. So you could only imagine how scary it is when you have a company pension. It's like, do I use this company pension until I'm age 90 and just live off of what it's offering? Or do I commute it all, take the money out and put it into my strategy, right? I decided it was actually quite an easy decision for me, relatively speaking, because my pension was non-indexed. So because it was non-indexed, I already knew that $2,000 that they were offering me today in 30 years was only going to be worth $600. So I'm going, and not that, if I died and my wife died, there would be nothing to leave to my kids. So there was a lot, again, even that I did, if you look up there and you won't see the actual writing, but it was the pros and cons still from when we did it. We did a full pros and cons on should we or should we not commute our pension. So we did, I made the decision to commute the pension. So that actually, of course, when you commute a pension, that brings in a lot of cash, because after several years of having the pension run, when it basically liquidates down to cash, it's actually quite a lot. That basically finished it off. When I got that commuted that pension, it had to move to my Lira, which was, again, I think you're American, but in Canada, a Lira is a locked-in RRSP. That had to be then converted to what's called a LIF. And there's a whole bunch of things we had to do. But then I'd say by November of 2023, my strategy was where I would refer to not growing anymore. It is now in mature mode, and basically it was in cruise control. Basically, from there it was a lot of care and feeding. So I'd say actively, the strategy that I've been running right now has been fully active since November of 2023. Yeah.
You said so much, right off the bat. And one of the things that really struck me was that moment when you looked at your retirement account and you said, I don't know if this is going to do me well in retirement. Do you think the vast majority of investors are going to go through that same process if they don't take hold of their finances now?
You nailed it. It's amazing how many people just, and again, I have to say, until about 5 or 7 years ago, when I actually said, look, I'm getting scared, I don't know. The funny part is, when I was 55, I didn't know when I was supposed to retire. I didn't know when was the magic, was it at 61, whatever. And until I actually did this, what's called a retirement plan with the I'll give credit, RBC, our financial planner, actually sat down with us. Until I basically found out to myself, hey, I'm scared because I don't know when I'm going to retire. I don't know when I'm ready. I didn't know. I was in bliss. I just thought I'm just going to keep putting money into these balanced portfolios, and someday the magic day is going to be, okay, I'm ready to retire. And I think a lot of people, and I hate saying it, but the majority of people are sitting in the same bliss world that I sat in until I was about 55 and started getting scared as, can I retire? Unfortunately, I think too many people wait till it's too close. My first recommendation to you, now that I've gone through it, is to all your audience would be, if you plan on retiring sometime around 60, you should already have a good idea by 50. 10 years. I think you should have a 10-year window of saying, because you need about 8 to 10 years to start saying, okay, I know what I want. I know what my target is. I know I'm this far away on my balanced portfolio or my growth portfolio or my investment. What is the strategy I'm going to use? What are my expense ratios? What's my living expense? Do I want to travel around the world? These questions should be answered, in my opinion, 10 years before you retire. And then basically now you have your strategy. So I agree, I'm with you. I don't think a lot of people actually go through that effort to see, could they retire?
I think what's scary in some sense is we trust so easily and rely on, whether it's the pension plans, the 401ks, to do the job. And I just remember, a decade ago, working my first job and looking at these balanced portfolios in a 401k, and I go, target date funds, I don't know if this is good. Like, it doesn't seem like that's, I want more, like I want more than what the projections were. I guess the big question I want to ask you, for those of us lucky enough now to be watching this and hearing it straight from you, Perry, who just experienced this all, for the younger investors who are out there, would you advise them to pull out of those balanced funds and start actively managing, or at least go in a different direction earlier? And for those older investors who are out there, what would, let's say that the investors who now are on their tail end of the 50s, what would you say to them? So we'll go on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, so, I mean, regardless if it's young or old, the first thing I'm going to say, and again, I'm not a financial planner, I have no certifications, I can't provide any advice. Perry's opinion is... Perry's opinion is that it all depends. I have relatives that are in the boat I was in that still contribute to their balanced portfolio and just hand money to the bank. If they don't have the active interest of getting involved on what investing's about, of actually being interested in saying, well, what's an ETF? Like, what, how do I run a self-managed portfolio? I would be hesitant to say that they should take the bull by the horns and start doing it themselves, because honestly, you could be in more trouble than not if you decide you're going to move away from something you're not comfortable about, or you don't know, like I'm lucky. I have just a love for finance and investing. So for me, it was a no-brainer. But there are a lot of people out there that just don't know. They don't know an ETF from a stock. They don't even know what an ETF means. So I'd be a little more hesitant with regards to saying they should move over. What I would recommend they should do is they should get more scared that is their investment going to deliver for them when they're ready to retire. And if they've sort of, that takes some investigation. Like, if they're saying, no, it's not going to work, then they turn around and say, well, what can work? And then they have to decide, am I going to take the effort to actually start learning this and start having the passion to want to invest? Or am I comfortable with living on my CPP and OAS and my pension because I've worked at Air Canada or CN, I'm just using arbitrarily a number, and they've got a great pension, I'm just going to, so I can't say that they should do it. I think they should actually have a sit down with themselves and decide, is it for me to actually actively invest or not actively invest? And if I'm not actively investing, then I should really look at my options as who can at least help me get to my retirement goals. So that would be my answer there, because of course the one side would say, oh yeah, I mean, look at my success and everyone should do it. Well, unfortunately not everybody has that kind of desire to do it or knowledge to actually do that kind of stuff. So that would be my answer, is I think they should, but it all depends on if you're ready to do it and willing to do it, because don't do it if you don't have the passion to do it, right?
Interesting. As you're sharing, I'm sitting here thinking, why aren't more people proactive about this? And I almost feel like to some extent, it comes down to a lack thereof courage. It takes a lot of courage to start to look into your finances in the first place, get real with yourself and start to project forward. Will you make it? Yeah. And I almost think people want to just close a blind eye towards it and say, you know what, I'm going to hope for the best.
That was me 10 years ago. Even as much as I love finance and investing, I was in the same boat. I was like, well, I've been contributing all this time, I should be able to make it. The other thing I'm going to say that's a factor, and it's been a thorn under my side for my entire life, because I do love finance, and actually when I was doing IT, I worked for a lot of finance, insurance, and those kind of companies. What really has always bothered me, and I don't know why governments don't step up, is during grade 1 through grade 12, at least through grade 6 through grade 12, why are they not teaching financial budgeting and things? They teach you about Greek history and calculus, but they don't teach you about the things that every person has to deal with, is show me how to budget my money. Show me what an investment is. Show me how to do ETFs. Show me how to balance my, these, in my opinion, should be at math, English, finance, investing, and budgeting should all be mandatory courses. And yet I just don't, for the life of me, understand why they're not. So that's my soapbox of something that bothers me.
I almost feel like it bothers me as well. I mean, I look around and, countless amounts of my friends have, like you already shared, no idea the difference between an ETF and a stock, no idea even between a IRA, a 401k, up in Canada, you have the alike. But this is, it's crazy. And everybody, at least in my financial world, talks about exactly that, but yet nothing's ever done.
Yep.
I want to go back to actually something else that you shared as well here, because you spoke about a very specific moment. You're watching TV, or at least you have it playing in the corner there, and you were invested into stocks or ETFs that were paying 6%, and then you heard out of nowhere 13%.
Right.
And so today I feel like there's a lot of investors, a ton of them, and there's a brand new ETFs that are out there that are new vehicles. A lot of these leverage funds, derivatives trading. There was that moment that you were invested into those 6%ers. And I'd love to know what exactly those stocks were that were at the 6% range. Yep. And then for the investors who are out there that are still going to battle you here and say, Perry, 13%, 20%, I mean, really impossible, erosion, no way. I'm going to stick to my 6%ers.
Yep.
What's like the key to the lock there to get them to see the other side?
I think they're the kind of people, and again, there's nothing wrong with them. There's those that are the trailblazers, and those are the laggers. The ones that have basically, and again, they've been indoctrinated, just like everybody's indoctrinated with every kind of culture and science or whatever. Like until we knew the earth was round, the earth was flat. Right. And until there's enough evidence that actually turns you to say, wow, I can't deny that. I cannot deny that. So I think for the ones that are basically still the deniers, they keep turning around. And again, I'm very passionate. I apologize to the Blossom community that when somebody really starts getting at me, I will, like a dog with a bone, I'll go right back at them. Right. So but when they turn around and say that all rock is bad rock and it's always erosion and stuff like that, I think The only thing that's going to change their mind is after 5 more years of evidence. Sooner or later, again, I'll just turn around. You go back 15 years, there was no such thing as an ETF. It was all mutual funds, right? Until Canada, a company in Canada, I think it was BMO, I can't remember who it was, came up with the first concept of an ETF. Everyone poo-pooed on ETFs. What's this ETF stuff like? So I think we're now in that new era of derivatives-based ETFs that we were with when ETFs emerged or when something else emerged. And you're going to have those for several years that are going to turn around and say, nah, those ETFs, I don't believe them. They're too risky, stuff like that. I think the same is going to happen with derivative-based ETFs. I don't think that they're a flash in the pan. I don't think they're a scam. In my opinion, they were used all along back in the hedge fund manager days of the 70s for the rich people, the wealthy that could actually hire managers that would do that work for them. Somebody just finally turned around and says, why can't I do this for the mass community, for the retail investor that have been done for the wealthy people, with exclusive thing? And I think sooner or later they're going to turn around. Again, I'm not there to try to convince them. I know it's working for me. I will debate with them anytime they want to have a debate. But I'm not there to convince them. If they believe that growth strategy is the only way to go and there's no other way of doing it, it's really up to them to decide to their, come to whoever you want a be moment and let them come there. But I am definitely the kind of person that wants to show my journey to say, yeah, you could turn around with all these theories and that, but at the end of the day, I'm getting paid $40,000 a month. I'm holding my NAV stable. My lifestyle in my retirement is something that I would never have dreamed of 3 years ago. I was thinking 3 years ago, man, if I could just make my investments last to age 90, $5,000 a month, that'll be good, but how am I going to deal with buying a new car? I don't know. To a point where I'm creating TFSA accounts for my daughters so that they now have what I have because I have so much excess cash that I can hand to them and start setting up their finance. Those are things that I would have never been able to do. And so to me, I'm happy. I know it works for me. And I'm also that kind of person. And remember I said when I was doing systems design, I was working for very large international companies. They didn't go with half-baked solutions. They basically had to meet regulatory concerns. They had to meet risk mitigation. When I developed a solution, I had to make sure that it had failover and diversity. So I took that knowledge of doing architecture and system design and built it into my portfolio. Why do I have 27 ETFs? Because I believe in diversity. And I don't want one of my ETFs to take me down. So I built a solution that should be relatively, again, we can't stop a collapsing market no matter what. At the end of the day, a sinking ocean lowers all ships. But I want mine to be as low risk or risk mitigated as possible. And if they could do it as well with their growth strategy, more power to them. So
I mean, look, it's interesting, even just what you shared. At one point in time, this type of derivatives, these derivative ETF-like vehicles were for the quote-unquote sophisticated investor. And what do I mean by that? The wealthy investor. So
the wealthy
that's
investor,
really what they mean by sophisticated. It means wealthy. So all these nice Wall Street, the Wall Street jargon. But now we have all of these capabilities today. And still today, one of the big questions, is, and a lot of young investors would make this case and argue it. So I want to bring it up to you and get the Perry opinion as you shared. Should a younger investor be focused on derivative ETFs and that passive income stream, or should they be more focused on growth at the get-go and then slowly over time switch to these passive income ETFs?
Yeah, and that is a very, let's say, provocative question. Because every financial planner, every investment analyst is going to tell you that the young people should focus on growth. Growth is the only thing they need. And you know what? And then because at the end of the day, nothing outperforms growth, right? And that yada, yada, yada. Okay, that's been ingrained into us. The problem is so many people have never asked the young investor, the young adult. I have 2 daughters, 30 and 31. Why is that such a challenge to do a growth strategy when you're 30 years old? Here's my problem. And I'm living it because I know what I was like and I know what my daughters go through right now. My younger daughter, basically, she has a nice salary, but it's not enough that by herself she could actually own a home and stuff. She has just enough that she can make do and stuff like that. What is she missing right now? Income. She's missing additional income. So when you got somebody like, my daughters, and I'll say 90% of the other 20s and 30 years old, they're just starting their career. Their salaries are not up into the six figures because they're just starting their career. And you're now telling them, in addition to a mortgage, in addition to having kids, in addition to paying for the inflation of food, try to put away $1,000 a month so that you can have a growth strategy so that when you retire, you'll be okay. Well, I'm always the one that thinks outside the box saying, why can't I create a derivatives using these powerful yields that are coming out of these derivative-based passive investing? Why can't I create a strategy for them in their TFSA, which is the tax-free one in Canada for your American viewers? Why can't I create a tax-free savings account derivative strategy for them that generates them income that they can use? Now, again, they can take a portion of it and reinvest it, which is what I recommend they do. But the other thing is, if they have a month where, for example, my one daughter had health issues with her cat, so her cat had like a $600 bill. Well, if she needs that money for that, she could use it for that, and without actually taking it from her actual employment account. My oldest daughter actually is, because she does have a good salary, she's using her derivative-based income strategy to do what she could barely do when she didn't have it. And that is, like up here in Canada, it's called an RRSP. I think it's your 401k if it's related, right? Where you contribute into this thing and then you get a tax deduction when you do it. But of course, it also helps you save until you retire. So it's a deferred tax, right? She was putting $100 a month into it. And even then she was like, geez, I'd rather be spending on something else. But okay, just so I can say I'm doing it, I'm going to put $100 a month into this thing. Well, I said, here's an idea. I'm going to, again, not everyone has this opportunity, but now with the transfer of wealth from the old generation to the new generation, I have the money. I will set you up with a minimum base of, say, $20,000. It's going to generate you, I could set it up the portfolio so it can generate you about $1,000 a month. I want 500 of that money to go into your RRSP tax-free every month. Well, she's now gone net 600 because she was only contributing 100 out of her employment income. Now she doesn't have to contribute anything into her RRSP. She's getting now $500 into her RRSP, which gives her even a 5 times larger tax deduction. And she's saving money into her RRSP, which she could actually put into a growth strategy. Let the TFSA be the income strategy and let the RRSP be the growth strategy if you want. It's your options. But so I asked myself, why is this so bad? Like, what's so wrong with it? So my opinion, I think people need to really think twice before they say that just basically the echo chamber of young people should only do growth strategy. I was like, okay, I don't want to be there to turn around and tell everyone they're wrong. But I'm saying, why don't people consider the income strategy for the youth that works just as good as the income strategy for me as a retiree? At the end of the day, we both want income. If I could keep the NAV stable and it generates this much money every month, why wouldn't I do it, right? So that's sort of my long answer to your question.
I want to ask you if you had to explain derivatives-based investing to a fourth grader. Yeah. For those of us who are just listening now to our conversation and saying, like, what is derivative-based investing? How exactly does it work? I feel like you're the perfect man to describe it to a fourth grader in terms that we would all be able to understand based on your background. So what's that elevator pitch?
The elevator pitch is that a derivative-based, you say derivative-based strategy, or what's a covered call?
We'll go with both.
Okay.
Just to break down the overall umbrella of how exactly your portfolio produces income.
Sure. Okay. So because it's important, because the derivative-based strategy is based on covered call ETFs. And I'll actually refer to them as options contract-based ETFs, because there are a few that actually use secured puts. They don't use covered call, but everyone nicknames them covered call ETFs. Basically, a covered call ETF basically says, I really don't as much care about... So everyone knows what an ETF is. It's a container that holds investments. Okay, so that's your basic. basically a covered call ETF says, I'm going to put an underlying in there. I'm going to put a stock in there. I don't care what the stock is. The key part of it is the more volatile, the better, but any stock will do. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to write insurance contracts to anybody that's looking for an insurance for the volatility of that stock going up and down. So really option contracts are insurance policies. For somebody that's shorting, they want something long. And for somebody that's long, they want something short. So you're turning around and saying, well, I have the stock. And since I already have the stock, give me $5. And in the next week, if it goes beyond what you're uncomfortable with, I'll give you my stock. If you're not, you have to pay me money to give you that opportunity. So they basically, okay, I'll give you $3 a share to have that opportunity for insurance. And if it doesn't come true, you take the $3 and you basically, it becomes yours and you didn't lose your stock. So honestly, that's what they're making their money on. They're making money on writing these insurance policies, collecting the money just like an life insurance company says. Every day I pay my life insurance. They collect my premiums every month for 10, 15, 25, 30 years. And they make money on it. So that's really what an options contract is, and that's what a covered call ETF is. They're paying you distributions from proceeds from the contracts written on those underlyings. So that's what a covered call ETF is, really. And that's why I want to make this distinction. Some people refer to covered call ETFs as paying out dividends. They technically, for the most part, don't. They pay out proceeds, which are referred to as distributions. And distributions and dividends, like 6 of one, half dozen of the other. They're actually a little bit different. For example, distributions from proceeds from options basically generate ROC. It's basically tax classified as ROC. Well, that's a huge, big difference for taxes, right? Because ROC is not taxed, whereas a dividend income is taxed. So I keep on nagging people and say, don't call them dividends, they're distributions. Okay, so
I was just going to ask you that because there is a lot of confusion out there.
Yeah.
A lot of people will take a look at these ETFs generating the 13% yields or 13+% and say you're going to get 13+% worth of a dividend yield. And no, it's a distribution rate, not a dividend yield.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly important. So I'm happy you highlighted that.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you is the old way of the traditional dividend investor, is that strategy or approach, is that dying out, do you think?
I don't think it's dying out. I think there's still, I mean, when you got a lot of Legos in your Lego box, they're all Legos in your Lego box, right? It all depends on your risk, your risk comfort, right? For example, if you're a kind of person that said, look, I am the kind of person, I'll sleep better at night knowing that everything's going to be good. I'm willing to actually accept a lower payout or a lower growth or a lower dividend. It doesn't matter what. I'm willing to be more conservative. Then you could turn around and say that, okay, well, maybe I'll look at dividends. Now, that being said, that's a misnomer, and that's basically a myth because there's a lot of times, and I actually heard it, and I'm glad Adriano pointed it out in one of the interviews he did recently. Dividends are not less risky than covered call options, because at the end of the day, when the markets are going down like the 2020 pandemic crash, guess what was not being paid anymore? Dividends. Guess what was still being paid in 2020? Distributions from covered call options, because one of the favorite scenarios for covered call options is flat or going down. When you're going down, you're winning all your contracts. You're generating income as you're going down. When the markets are collapsing and people are in big trouble, companies, first thing they do is start pulling off their dividends. So I wouldn't even call dividends to be a lower risk. It's perceived to be that one, but I don't think it is, right? So I wouldn't say that they're going the way of the dodo, but they are not becoming the primary, because the old day used to be growth or income. And if it's fixed income, there's dividends or bonds, right? So that's the only option you have. All you're now adding is, well, we've got another income here that's a lot more aggressive called, covered call ETFs or covered call strategy. So I think dividend-based retirement investment is going to actually become a smaller part of the pie. But I don't think it's going to go away, because at the end of the day, companies still produce dividends. People are still going to want them. But I think it's going to be a smaller part of the income side of the growth versus income pie. So
we're at this incredible inflection point, really. I was at a conference not too long ago, a big ETF conference over in Vegas. And, one of these segments, they were talking about how the amount of individual stocks at this point in time, around 4,000, is about to be passed up by the amount of ETFs that are now out there, which is crazy to think about. But now what always drives my thinking is, well, not all 4,000 of these ETFs are going to be great vehicles to invest into. Right. Yeah. And as we progress and as these derivative ETFs do come out, these leveraged income ETFs, not all of them are ideal. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, Perry, what should we be looking for when we go to invest in these ETFs that should hopefully generate us those 13+% yields?
Yeah. Well, there's a whole spectrum. And again, I agree with you. I mean, since 2022, 2023, that's when almost these covered call ETFs literally exploded. They're like the weeds on my grass in the front yard. They went from nothing to all of a sudden, that's all I got in my lawn is weeds. Well, now all I got is these covered call ETFs everywhere. And I mean, I can't go through a day without another ETF manager announcing another triple leverage and double leverage. And we're going to do so. My concern, and I tend to be the kind of person, stick towards the center. Like, find the range of conservative to aggressive that you like, and then do risk mitigation if you're moving closer to the higher risk. But to me, I already start going. I hate using analogies, but if you're my age, I remember the disco era. And disco died when Disco Duck and everybody started showing up and everybody started creating everything into a disco. When you seen AC/DC create disco, you knew that the end of disco was coming, right? So I think the thing that scares me about covered call ETFs and derivative-based ETFs is these ones that are literally trying to outperform the next so that they can get noticed, right? The triple leverage, the double leverage, the synthetic, again, the synthetic ones are pretty creative, but I'm starting to pull back a little on to what extent are synthetic based underlyings good. I think if you want to be more on the conservative side of covered call ETFs, it'd be the ones where they're not using synthetics. Now again, I do use them, but I actually put them into a portion of my portfolio that says these are my ultra yielders, and they only make up a certain portion of my holding weight. So I'm not saying don't invest in them, but keep the holding weight down to a number that if they were to go to zero or they just keep sinking to nothing, you really didn't lose much, and you actually pulled out a lot of income before they did die. If they actually die, I don't think they will. They'll just basically, at worst case, the bad ones will basically constantly be reverse split until they become so small no one's going to invest them in anymore. But I would say stick to the ones that are basically hold actually native underlyings. The Canadian ETFs from Hamilton, Evolve, Harvest, and Global X and the stuff like that, they tend to be the ones, they're rock solid in my opinion. Like at the end of the day, I have like 60% of, about 50% now. I have 50% that are Canadian ETFs, and then about another 50% are the more aggressive, ultra yielding US ETFs. The Canadian ones, they're so stable that they're boring. and that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. Because my spreadsheet tracks every month's distributions, and I actually write them down so that I can do a trend on my distributions of 6-month window. And when it comes to the Canadian ones, it's copy paste. It's the same one as last one, the same one as last one. So, and their price ranges, again, people talk about erosion. Most of them are not erosion. Most of them are they're sitting just like a stock like Tesla moves from 150 all the way to 400. These guys have ranges as well. They have decline sides and high sides. So you'll have like HYLD that was as high as 16 and as low as 12. I don't care, as long as it stays in that price box, it's still generating all the distributions that it's supposed to do. So I don't lose sleep at night that when HDIV goes down 30, 80 cents or $1, because I know they're in that price range and I know that they'll still generate premium options on it. So that would be my recommendation. If you really want to get into this, stick with the more conservative, stable ones at first. If you want to try some of the more aggressive ones, I would mix them in as, say, an 80-20 split. until you really get to understand them. And then it won't be science anymore. It'll be more gut feel. Like, I know there's certain ETFs that they come out and go, no, in 2 minutes of reading, I was like, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in that one. I'm not going to do triple leveraged ETFs and stuff like that. And I also make sure that if I'm going after one that's higher risk, or if there's one that says, it's an ultra yielder, like the HMAX's ones, make sure that it doesn't take up 20-30% of your portfolio. Like my spreadsheet allocates a target weight for every ETF in my portfolio. And yeah, I tweak it at times because a new ETF comes in, so I have to rebalance the 100%. But I always try to keep my portfolio close to my target weight, and try to be disciplined in doing that. If it would be my recommendation there. So I say stay away from the crazy new ones you're going to see. You're going to see a lot of new ones. Start realizing which ETF managers tend to always have good reputations. Harvest in Canada, I'm not plugging them in any way. I like Harvest because when they say they're going to put out an ETF and it stays relatively stable, and when they say they can do 25% yield, they will actually put buffering in there, in my opinion, that makes sure that they stay at the 25%, because they know they want income investors. They know that the income investors, which is their clientele, are the ones that want some stability. So you start saying, oh, if something else comes out from Harvest, I will definitely read a lot closer on what Harvest has newly come out with. And I'm just using them as an example. I would say the same thing with Hamilton and Evolve and the other ones. But when something comes out from a company I've never heard of and they're saying, we're going to triple, we're going to do 180% yield, it won't even take more than a minute before I say, no, not interested. So,
it's funny. It's like we're in this new era of getting wealthy with passive income streams. Yeah. And, I hear you talk about these yields, the yield traps of the old, right? The old yield traps and dividend investing used to be like the AT&Ts and Verizon sometimes of the world, right? The Altria Groups and Philip Morris. Yeah. And now we have to take a look at these ETFs and what type of crazy yields that they're dishing out. Because if you get invested into those ones, those are the ones you really do have to be careful with. Yeah. Yeah. So you're just sharing, go for the more conservative approach. You don't need to go for like the 50% crazy off the charts yields.
You don't have to. No. And even even if you do go after a couple of 50%, make it sort of like your hot money, your gambling money. Make it 2% of your portfolio and take a shot with it, right? But don't make it a major aspect of it. Take a shot with it. People learn most about an ETF when they actually own it, right? Even I know there's one guy. Again, I'm just putting out names. I think it's Armchair Investor. He does that where he basically says, "I'm going to buy five units of it." Like, not enough that he's even going to make money. He does it so as soon as it becomes part of his portfolio, he actively starts watching it and he actually starts monitoring its ebbs and flows. Like, I look at my ETFs and my portfolio, and I know after so many months of holding them, which ones are having a bad day, which ones are having a good day, which ones are trending the right way, because you start really learning the personality of every ETF. So I would say until people get to that point where they really understand how ETFs work, these covered call ETFs work, I would, as you said, Ari, stick to the conservative ones, throw in a couple ultras that you really like, just for gambling money. And then eventually they may not be gambling money. They may turn around like people, Misty now is sort of, everyone talks about Misty, right? Because Misty, before it was a crapshoot. Now it's like, it's the number one ETF for ultra highs. Now, that being said, it becomes so large that they've actually lost their applied volatility. So their yields are actually coming down because they become so popular that people are like, well, they're not getting that 125% yield anymore. Well, okay, but are you going to complain about 50% yield? So...
In today's world, yes.
Yes. In today's world, people bitch about a 50% yield when they were doing 100. It's like, let's put things in perspective. Do you want 5% from AT&T or... right? Yeah.
So, all right, someone wants, at this point, they're listening, they're sold, they're saying, you know what? Perry's made a lot of great points. They've probably taken a look now at your portfolio on Blossom, and they're looking at their portfolio, and they're saying, well, how do I pivot? I'd love to get your take on how somebody could go about pivoting Do they just sell off all their individual stocks and head into ETFs? Do they keep their stocks? How would you play it?
Well, the approach they could take, and again, everyone will do it their own way. The approach I took is because I had to do the same thing, and I did it in 11 months. So remember, in 2023, I went from February with not even knowing what a covered call ETF was to November, basically almost 85% of my entire investments and pension was all this. So I went through that transition. The way I went through it was, first of all, I would turn around, if you really are nervous about it, open up a practice account. Open up a practice, like I know I use RBC as my brokerage. They offer practice accounts. Open up a practice account, and for a month or 2 or 3 months, which actually some of my ex-coworkers who are now in the same strategy I am in, I taught them that way, basically saying, open up a practice account, buy some of these right now. Hang on. Buy some of these right now and watch them for a month or two. Like, don't rush it too much. Learn what is going on first, right? After you feel comfortable enough that I understand how these guys move, because you look at CNYE from Harvest, it was down at $10. It's now at 17 in the matter of 2 weeks. It's gone from one of my worst performers amongst Harvest to being a rock star, right? So they got to realize how that personality happens. Then once they feel that they're comfortable enough, the next thing I would do is say, either create a new non-reg or TFSA account. You can have multiple TFSA accounts. Create a new TFSA account, put some money towards it, or transfer some from an existing TFSA, and saying, okay, let's try it with one account. The TFSA is the best. That's the government's biggest gift they've given to the citizens of Canada was the TFSA. Start going there and start with some conservative ones, because now you're actually playing with real money. Pick a time frame when you feel that you're comfortable. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's only 3 months, and but when you feel I really like this, then start adding more. Like, to me, start filling out the TFSA. Say, hey, you know what? I created a new TFSA. I have an existing TFSA. That existing TFSA was all stocks and bonds and dividend income stuff. I think I'm going to transform it. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to cash this out, and I'm going to move it into the new TFSA, and I'm going to basically now build the new strategy. If it works on your TFSA, then you decide, okay, I really like this. It's been several months. It's delivering. Then you decide, okay, I've now got an RRSP. Let's now work on my wife's RSP, or let's work on my RSP. So mine, I did it one account at a time, and I did it until I felt I was comfortable. Then I say, okay, practice account, comfortable. Okay, a small TFSA play money account, okay, comfortable. Moving my entire TFSA, comfortable. Moving all my TFSAs. So you basically move one account at a time, and wait till you, just like you're eating food, chew it, digest it, and wait for that to digest before you take your next bite. And the pace at which you do it, I did it in 11 months. Some people might take 2 years. Go at your own pace. Do not feel, don't be rushed doing it. Do it at the pace you feel comfortable, that you like what you're seeing, right? And keep learning until the more you keep learning, the more comfortable you are about the strategy, right? So that would be my recommendation on the thing. And then to turn around and say that my portfolio is higher risk, because I know a lot of the pure growth naysayers to say, oh yeah, but that's risky stuff. Like, well, I don't know if you know what it is, but for example, Snowball, there's a thing called the Sortino ratio, which basically it does an analysis of a stock or an entire portfolio and says what's the risk reward ratio on this thing. And basically, if you could attain about a 2 on your ratio, then you're actually a pretty risk averse. You're a very comfortable thing. I'm at 4.3. which means I'm extremely on the conservative side on that. So for somebody to say that my portfolio is high risk, well, I don't know. Sortino says that I'm actually lower risk than buying stocks and bonds. So I'm happy with what Sortino tells me. So.
Look, I always like to live by there's a slogan, call it a slogan in the U.S. Army that, and Jeff Bezos is notorious for always talking about this as well, that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So for anybody out there thinking about making this transition, follow through on exactly what Perry said. It took him 11 months. You can use that almost as I would as a benchmark. Yeah. You don't need to do this all by tomorrow. Get comfortable. But with comfortability, What I did notice you spoke a lot about was how much these babies can swing, and there could be volatility. So I'd love to ask you, how do you sit comfortably in the volatility?
Because I really understand how these covered call ETFs work, right? They literally generate income because they are volatile, which to maybe a growth investor that buys IBM stock or stuff or Royal Bank stock and they see their stuff going up $1 or $2 and they're like, wow, that's a lot of movement. Well, when you got to remember how these covered call ETFs are generating 20, 30, 40, 50%. They're not investing in underlyings like Royal Bank. Because if they did, you would not be happy with the yields they're going to be putting out. Because, their volatility would be, it went up 4 cents. Well, it went down 3 cents. But they also would be generating you a yield of about 3%. Because at the end of the day, these covered call ETFs make their income by high volatility. So because I fully already intimately understand when I'm buying these ETFs, I'm buying them based on what their underlyings are. It's the underlying that's volatile. And to me, volatility is good. I've personified it as volatility is good, right? Whereas if you look at a growth investor or a dividend investor, they're like volatility is bad. Like I like volatility in only one direction and then that's up. Well, to a passive income investor using derivatives, down is just as good as up. Matter of fact, too fast of up is bad for these covered call ETFs. That's when they cap. So you don't want big growth on these covered call ETFs on their underlyings because you're actually capping your contracts. So I look at it as volatility is good. Like, and again, if I have lack of volatility, a good example is we just talked about it, is Misty. Misty right now, it used to be the darling making 125, 150% yields. Well, now they're generating, I think if I have looked down here, they're generating about 50% yields. Well, they're generating 50% yields because MSTR itself has really reduced its volatility. It doesn't jump up and down much anymore. So the NAV is on that ETF has gone from swinging $8 this way to $8 that way, down to swinging 50 cents this way and $1 that way. But I'm also a little bit unhappy because it's not swinging anymore. I'm not getting 125% yield. Now, that being said, I look at it as every horse in my stable is generating income for me. So if it's 50%, great. If it's 40%, as long as it keeps delivering, that's all I care. So I sleep at night because I know a bad market day is going to be a good contracts day, right? So and the other thing I look at, Ari, that's really, I think you see it in the Blossom community. They actually say it quite often. A bad day is a great buying day. It's a day to, because again, I generate about 40,000 a month in my portfolio. I only need about 8 to 10,000. Most of it just gets reinvested, not because I have to. I generally try to reinvest about 30 to 40% just to keep it stable and just to constantly fight inflation and stuff like that. But hey, if I have to reinvest 80% of it one month, I'll do it just because what else am I going to do with it? I might as well reinvest it and generate more income the next month, right? But when you turn around and look at something like that, and I say, okay, I have $10,000 to reinvest. When I see the markets have a bad hair day, like go down 2%, I'm like, okay, which one of these can I buy now? Like, I'm happy when it's happening because like, oh my God, Coney's down $1, I'm buying, right? So that's why I sleep at night, because a bad day is a good buying day. A good day is I'm happy that my portfolio is staying stable. So
this has been such an insightful hour, and I want to just ask you one last question.
Sure.
You have decades worth of experience, working, investing in those balanced funds, coming to realizations, more recently getting invested in these leveraged and passive income funds.
Yeah.
What would be one key piece of advice that if you were to go back to yourself when you were in your 20s, 30s, that you would sit down with yourself and say, if you were to just do one thing, Perry, just do this, what would that key piece of advice be?
That would be a hard one. And it's funny you asked that, Ari, because I sort of said to myself, man, if I only knew this 10 years ago, I could have retired at 55, right? The problem is that the explosion, the tools that would have made me do that didn't exist. Like covered call ETFs did not, for the most part. Yeah, there was a few of them in 2016. Again, Canadian ones. I have to plug Canada for inventing another great idea. But
we applaud you. We applaud
yeah,
you.
yeah. So back in 2016, there were some, but at the end of the day, I couldn't have done what I know now then, because I would have had to get into active, personalized, derivatives-based investing. To this day, I would never want to do it. I love understanding that how it works, but I would never actively. I don't take any pleasure in actually doing options trading myself. So I can't turn around and say, if I only would have known this 10 years ago, I would have gone into past, this thing. What I would turn around and say to myself is, don't be as scared about income-based strategies as being something only for the old retired folks like me. Like, open your mind to ideas of why can't I do something? Like, and again, I wouldn't say jump whole in into something that you just heard on the internet or on the radio. If there's something that actually is like, why can't I do that? Don't sit there and just say, well, yeah, but the whole establishment says it's a bad idea. Sit there and say, no, let's prove it to myself that I could do it. Like, if I think that, I could be doing it like a lot of the pure growth investors in the Blossom community are doing right now, saying, nah, Perry, it doesn't work. And I could just turn around and be the same one saying, no, the whole investment community says that this is just a flash in the pan and it's a scam and stuff like that. But until I actually proved it to myself and actually started building a test case and actually don't believe everything you read on the internet. Take it in and absorb it as learning as, for example, the biggest thing was, they erode. All covered call ETFs erode. Well, that's an important argument and a complaint to bring up. But I didn't just sit there and say, yeah, well, that's what everyone says they erode, so I guess they erode. No, I said they erode. Okay, let me find out what this means. Do they really erode? Do they all erode? Is it just some that erode? And that's why I actually took the active thing and said, no, I'm going to call the Hamilton fund manager and ask him, how does this work right from the horse's mouth? So my recommendation to myself 10 or 15 years earlier would be, again, don't take what you read on YouTube influencers and stuff like that as verbatim God-like instructions. Use it, listen to it, then seek for several other opinions, and then follow your own path. Follow your own path is what I would say. So
now, investors, you can get Perry's full portfolio breakdown on Blossom. So if you're not already on Blossom, there will be a link down there in the pinned comment description. Highly, highly recommend Blossom just for everything that it gifts you with. A community, investors who are excited to invest. Not only that, but you can click into their actual portfolios and see exactly what they're invested into, transparently get their trades. I mean, everything and more from Blossom. So I wanted to plug that because, Perry, you're $40,000 a month coming in, 1.5 million or so there. It is just absolutely impressive. And our hats are off to you. We'll all jump to Blossom at this point to check out your portfolio and more. I'm sure you'll get some messages coming in. But I do want to say thank you for joining us here on Masters of the Market. And to all the investors out there, until the next go-round of Masters of the Market, we will catch you in the next one.